Today we're going to start talking about cell transport, and what this actually means is how things move into and out of the cell. So, like I said, it's the process of substances moving across the cell membrane. Now, it's important because it moves substances that are needed for metabolism, growth, and reproduction into the cell, and it moves wastes out. And whenever it moves these things, it has to move them along what we call a concentration gradient, which is the amount of the substance that is not the same across the membrane. And so it does that until we reach equilibrium, which is when there's no concentration gradient or the amount of the substance is equal. Now, it's important to note that the molecules are still going to keep moving back and forth, but there's no net change. So we're never going to have more water molecules on this side than on this side, or more salt on this side than this side, or whatever. So if we take a look at these two pictures, which you have in your notes, decide, have these two pictures reached, are they in a concentration gradient or have they reached equilibrium? Now, there are two different types of transport. The first is passive and the other is active. So we're going to focus on passive transport first. Passive transport is when molecules follow the concentration gradient. So it's when things move from high concentration to low. I like to think of it kind of as rolling down a hill because it doesn't require any actual energy. So it's like whenever you were a little kid and you'd lay up at the top of the hill and you rolled down. Well, it didn't take you very much energy to do that. There are three different types of passive transport. The first is diffusion, and this is when molecules spread from areas of high to areas of low concentration. And this is going to happen with small molecules. So if you watched this this image right here, you saw that the molecules started out in the corner and then they spread out. Okay, so they're going to keep spreading until they reach an equilibrium. This is why whenever somebody farts in class, it only smells bad for a certain amount of time. The second type is osmosis, and it's the same thing as diffusion, except because it happens so often, water gets its own name. Okay? Water is osmosis. It's the movement of water from a high concentration to a low concentration. Okay? Osmosis is water. I'd never want to hear you say that salt moved due to osmosis. I want you to always remember osmosis is water. Now, when water moves, it can move in different types of solution. If we were to take a cell that was 10% salt and stick it into a 20% salt solution, the water is going to move out of the cell because the water moves out, which causes the percent of salt to increase because there's less water. Okay, the water moves. Salt doesn't move. Water moves, okay? We call this a hypertonic solution because it's going to cause that cell to shrivel. In an isotonic solution, the water is just going to move back and forth and the cell is going to be pretty happy doing its little thing. In a hypotonic solution, it's the opposite of hyper. So we put a 20% salt solution cell into 10% salt solution in a beaker, and water's going to move in because it wants to dilute that salt, and the cell is going to swell. So hyper is skinny. Think about it. Hyper kids usually aren't very fat. And hypo means that we swell up like the letter O. Now, it's important for you to notice and remember that salt always sucks.
Cindy McCoy, call 101, please. Cindy McCoy.
So if we take a look at this picture, which the state loves to put on tests, you'll notice that we have a U-shaped tube that has a selectively permeable membrane. So remember, think about that. Selectively permeable means that it's going to select or choose what goes in and out of that membrane. So we have a solution that has a lot of water, not a lot of solute. And then we have a solution on this side that has more solute and less water. So what's going to happen? Is the solute going to move or is the water going to move? What did I just tell you? Water has its own name because it moves a lot. And like I said, salt sucks. So the water is actually going to go into the side that has more solute. So it does that until it reaches an equilibrium. So we may not have the same amount of solution, but the solution is going to have the same amount or the same percentage of solute in it. Now, the third type of passive transport is called facilitated diffusion. To facilitate means to help. And this is where, remember those proteins that we talked about in the membrane notes? this is where those proteins are going to act as doorways to let these solutes come through that may not like to mix with lipids, okay? So they're going to go through a carrier channel or a carrier protein, okay? So just to remember, just to remind you, passive transport requires no energy. It goes from the top of the hill to the bottom, follows the concentration gradient. There are 3 types. The first type is diffusion. Second type is osmosis. It's the same thing as diffusion, but it's water. It only has its own name because it happens so often. And the third type is facilitated diffusion, which requires some sort of help because those molecules are really big. Now, active transport kind of is the opposite. It requires cell energy because we're moving from low to high. So think about it. Whenever you were a kid, if you laid at the bottom of the hill and tried to roll up, it took you a long time and you were probably out of breath whenever you were done. Now, in order to get this done, we need pumps. We need something that's going to push the solutes in when they're really wanting to try to come out. So we're going to use some protein pumps. And there are 2 types of active transports, 2 other types of active transport. Exocytosis, X means to leave, and endocytosis, which means to take in. So here we see exocytosis. The cell is getting rid of large particles. So it's got these large particles and it's going to push them out. Okay? In endocytosis, the cell's going to take in large particles. So it might be a type of phagocytosis. Phago means to eat. Or penocytosis, which is to drink. And here you see the cell actually coming up and surrounding whatever that particle is to take it in. So, to review, cell transport, if no energy is required, it's passive transport. If energy is required, it's active. And that's it for today. I hope that you have written down all the vocab words that you need. Double check that you've got all those blanks filled in because remember, this is part of your grade from here on out. I'm going to be grading you on whether or not you've taken all of your notes. I hope you have a great day and I'll see you soon, guys.